the car rolled. It was a VW Beetle, and I went out the back window. I don't remember that happening. I was knocked out, but I was told that afterwards. The car kept going. I was going in one direction. The car was going in another direction once I left the car. When I opened my eyes, the guardrail was like literally above my head, and a very strange scene of being in the grass, their dog next to me, my brother's dog, barking. You're young and you just think you're just going to live forever.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich. Before we get started, listeners and viewers, you can get 15% off classic rock merchandise at oldglory.com with the code Booked on Rock. The link in the show notes or at bookedonrock.com under my deals. Now on to our guest, Don Pyle. He's the author of Rough Description, Love Letters and Ghost Stories from a Life in Music. This is a sharp, often hilarious look at his life in music, from co-founding Shadowy Men on a Shadowy Planet to navigating the chaos and rewards of touring. He shares behind-the-scenes stories involving figures like Steve Albini and the comedy troupe The Kids in the Hall, whose iconic theme his band created. Blending humor and reflection, Pyle traces a creative life shaped by punk rock, personal struggles, and a relentless drive to make art across music, film, and beyond. Don, great to have you on the show.
Thank you. That's a nice intro.
I'm
going to copy that and use it for my bio now.
There you go, man. That's it. We can finish it right there. So this is not a straight autobiography. You describe it almost like a collection of moments or impressions, and you also structured the book like a set list. Why did that feel like the right way to tell your story?
Well, I didn't want to do an autobiography. I'm kind of like, just like a million other people in bands. There's no kind of reason for me to do an autobiography. It's not really so much like my life, but just some of the situations that I've been in. I think I've been in some pretty unique and sometimes kooky situations from just doing this for so long, and just who you cross paths with, who you choose to cross paths with. And it kind of felt like writing it, really it initially came out of one photograph, a photograph of an artist named Wendy Coburn. And I did this small book called Shot in a Mirror that was photo portraits and did talks about them. When I was doing the talks, I would talk kind of like more at length. Like I didn't put any captions in the photos, like no description or anything, because it was just kind of too much. I didn't want to try and tell anybody's life story or anything, but there were things about Wendy that like really kind of preoccupied me and made me think a lot. And then when I would talk to audiences about that, people responded really positively. And it happened every time I did. I did talks with my first book as well. And, I realized that people are, interested in hearing some of these stories. And it's generally the kind of stuff that I really like reading. It's kind of like the context of, it's not only like the events themselves, but kind of like the social context about what's going on around them, what's happening in the times, how different things came to be. And so it's a lot of the stuff that just kind of preoccupies me. I did it sort of like a set list because I just like made a list. Okay, what do I have something to say? What subjects do I have something to say about? And so kind of like made that list and then thought, okay, I can write a chapter on each of those things. So kind of like breaking it down in that way, it kind of felt like it was manageable and it was all things that I thought, I could have something interesting to say.
Very interesting. It feels like you're visiting with each chapter, just a part of your life, a section of your life, and it flows nicely that way.
Yeah. Like, most autobiographies, I got to say, like, I read a lot of autobiographies, and there are very, very few that I find like super compelling. And usually because the first third is like the sort of growing up stuff. And a lot of that stuff is sort of like pretty interchangeable. There are books that really deviate from that. And I don't know if I necessarily took inspiration from them, but like Geddy Lee's book, My Effin' Life, I loved that book. I really loved how much he talked about his family history in that, and kind of his exploration of his mother and different members of his family being involved in the Holocaust, and just the situation of how he got to where he was. So that was a book where I thought that the childhood and kind of the story, where it wasn't just about his childhood, it was like a broader context that really kind of informed who he is. Um, Bobby Gillespie's book Tenement Kid, I thought was similar. Nico Case's book, which is very much about her childhood. That book was also, really excellent.
That part of the title, Love Letters and Ghost Stories from a Life in Music, at what point did you realize that phrase captured the essence of the book?
The love letters thing is specifically about, like, some of the chapters. One thing that was like pretty obvious to me at some point is like, oh boy, like I'm writing about all these dead people, all these people
Right.
who've died, and so it was, they were appreciations for them. And some of them, some of those chapters, like Steve Albini, Dallas Good, Albert Chiat, my big brother, I wrote those like almost immediately after they died, and not thinking that they would be chapters in a book one day. It was really kind of to capture kind of the really heightened emotional thing that was going on for me at the time of their passing, and really wanting to both remember and kind of memorialize them. So that was sort of like the love letters part of it. The ghost stories part, I kind of feel like that. I mean, anything from the past that you're talking about, music stuff, stupid band stories, business dealings, all that stuff. I think a lot of that stuff is kind of like ghost stories. It's like scary stories from situations that many of my friends have also been in.
Sure.
But then also, I like literally thought about it in terms of the chapter about Dallas Good, my friend and bandmate, where I had this kind of like supernatural experience that, kind of felt like it was like a connection with the beyond,
Really?
So I felt like that one was like really a ghost story,
Yeah. I feel like he was in the room with you while you were writing.
No, I'm kind of one of those people who thinks that like when you're gone, you're sort of gone. But not feeling like he was there, but really, really super aware of his presence. Like some of the writing, Dallas and my mother, those two were the hardest ones to write about because, it really brings them very presently. It's kind of like what you are saying. So I guess they were kind of like in the room sort of figuratively, but I really, really felt their presence, and some of those things were hard to write because of kind of just refeeling
Sure.
some of the emotional things kind of in a deeper way than we normally do when we walk around with the memory of our best friend dying or our mother dying, those kinds of things.
Yeah. And for you, fortunately, you are still here to tell your story because there was a car accident and there's a chapter on this
Yeah.
that, man, that was serious. And you were just a kid in fifth grade, 1972. Take us
Yeah.
back to that summer day. What happened and how did that experience shape your outlook in life after that?
It's funny, I've known a few kids close to me who've gone through like really sort of like serious medical things that were kind of like potentially life threatening. And something that I said to both of them was like, I know this is really awful now, but this is going to be such a formative experience for you, because this is going to be like a landmark thing in your life that, there's lots of kind of like before and after. I think, at the time, I didn't know that I was like, on borderline of whether I was going to live or not. So um, I it wasn't until many years later that my sister or my mother mentioned that to me, like, we thought you were going to die. And I was like, oh, that hadn't even occurred to me. Like, I just, you're young and you just think you're just going to live forever. um, so I think that particularly hearing it when I was older, and along with just having people close to you die or become sick, as starts to happen a lot when when you get to my age, that it was part of kind of building a sort of source of empathy and appreciation for life, the living world, and just being here and being able to see, the leaves coming out in spring. Those things are really super meaningful to me. They the leaves coming out fill me with emotion.
Yeah, it's an appreciation of life.
Yeah. I think that all those experiences, they kind of add to it and kind of make life better as you go along. It's such a paradox that oh, your friend dying is going to make life better, and it's not that it makes life better; it makes your appreciation of what's happening.
And you were driving along the highway. They made sure you were wearing your seatbelt.
Yeah, I was wearing my seatbelt, and somehow the seatbelt either broke or came undone, and the car rolled. It was a VW Beetle, and I went out the back window. I don't remember that happening. I was knocked out, but I was told that afterwards that I went along the back window, or that I went out the back window. And I know from where I came to, where I was conscious, that it was, the car was fairly far away from where I was. So the car kept going. I was going in one direction. The car was going in another direction once I left the car. So, when I opened my eyes, like the guardrail was like literally above my head. And it's just a very strange scene of, being in the grass, their dog next to me, my brother's dog, barking and protecting me, from the ambulance people who were trying to get to me.
Time moved differently from how I'd always known it.
Yeah,
Slowed down, right?
yeah. Part of it is that kind of, I don't know if you've ever been knocked out or gone unconscious. It's a very strange thing. It's only happened to me a couple of times in my life, and it's like it's kind of hard to comprehend. Like where did that time go? Like, because
Yes.
you just blink and there's no gap in your experience.
I blacked out once and I was out for a minute, 2 minutes, and it, to me, it was a split second.
Yeah,
And I came to, and my mother was shouting my name. Are you okay? Are you okay?
yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. So it goes by in a split second like that. Yeah, amazing story. And again, thankfully you are here to tell that story and live to see punk rock in Toronto, right? You describe it as being part of a tribe. Take us back to that. What was the first moment you felt like you discovered something different with punk?
Well, really, honestly, like the very first sort of punk show that I think of as happening in Toronto, which was the Ramones playing in 1976 at the New Yorker. I didn't feel like I was part of a tribe or anything. I think that sort of like came later, where I felt like I had a community within the music scene, because to begin with, it was, I was younger than everybody else. When you're like at that show, I was 14, and a lot of the other people who were there, some of who I recognized from kind of like art things, or just kind of like the beginnings of, what became punk, like rep theaters. I recognized some of those people, and, if they were like 22, 23 years old, they were kind of they were significantly older than me, my perception anyway, if they were 9 or 10 years older. So it wasn't really until like a few years into like really going to shows intensely, that maybe 2 years before other people my age started to come into the scene. And that was when I really kind of like found that I had kind of like a community, because, you know, you would talk with other people and know other people who were older or in bands. But it wasn't until there was another 16-year-old who, you know, I could hang out with and who had very, very similar experiences. And then, you know, that one friend became 3 friends and 5 friends, and, you know, kind of included another girl from school who was also, you know, really into the kind of the beginning of punk rock as well. So it was just kind of like a, you know, it almost sounds like you know, Stand By Me or a story or something. You know, it was like, you know, yeah, you know, a girl at high school who I met from writing band names on desks. And,
Right.
you know, it was like, you know, who are you? We have to meet. And then, you know, we met, we started going to shows together.
What was it about punk rock that really pulled you in as opposed to regular, you know, straight mainstream rock and roll bands? Or
I mean, you know, I liked a lot of stuff all across the board, kind of previous to that, but it was the perfect music for that age, you know, for my age, where you just want something
restless
really
teenager.
want something fast and loud. And it was also kind of like the change for me where, you know, up until that point, I hadn't been to too many shows before I was 14, but they were all kind of like in arenas or stadiums and that kind of thing, where the person is really distant, the performer's distant, and you're not having kind of like an intimate experience. So to go to, you know, the shows that I was going to, where I'm literally at the edge of the stage, it was a completely different, totally, you know, enthralling experience. So to have that as kind of like your introduction into going into live music was totally thrilling, because there were like so many new ideas, new ways of doing things. You know, I really was excited by it. A lot of like the music that I was listening to a lot was like a lot of 40s, 50s, 60s music. Well, kind of like all eras, you know, I was always really devouring stuff. So I liked kind of the history and the connectivity of the history and music, but I also was really excited by new things, you know, like, and this felt like it was something really radical and extreme and new. You know, in retrospect, were the Sex Pistols so radical and new? Well, they were pretty radical for the time in terms of like how they really upset people. But, you know, their music was fairly straightforward rock and roll. But the upsetting people was also a really big part of the appeal of some of it, you know, that you were like, you know, listening to these records that were making the news and causing adults to be, you know, offended or outraged. You know, that was kind of exciting when, you know, one of my favorite bands, The Curse, put out a record about a shoeshine boy who was, you know, kidnapped off the street and murdered. And then it, you know, became news, you know, in the Toronto Sun. It was it was a sensational story. So there was something that was, you know, as awful as that was, and I recognize that, there was kind of like a thrill in being involved in this thing that was so disturbing to people, you know.
Yeah. And you didn't initially see yourself as a musician. What flipped that switch?
I always wanted to be in a band, but just didn't know how to do anything, and didn't have the opportunity. I wasn't selected for learning an instrument in high school, so I had told my mother I wanted to learn how to play guitar. She bought me a used guitar with a warped neck on it. And she didn't know the difference. I didn't know the difference. Someone told me later. It's like, I can't play this thing. And a book, you know, like that's just not the way that I can learn anything, you know, just here, you 10-year-old, go on your own with this guitar.
Yeah.
Lots of kids do, you know, it's amazing to me, like people that I know that become obsessed with an instrument at a really young age. But that wasn't me. But another thing that was really amazing about punk rock was like how it made everything democratic. It didn't matter whether you could play an instrument or if you'd been in a band before, or if you could even sing, because I didn't know what my singing voice sounded like, but I was, became a singer in a band with three friends. So that was kind of like my introduction to, being in a band, sort of being musical. But it was really kind of an accident that I started playing drums. Again, something that I thought, oh, that would be fun to do, but it wasn't like I had any place to practice drums. My mother wasn't going to stand for that at home. So two of the guys that I'd been in Crash Kills 5 with, the band that I was in, um, they had like kind of like a little more of a falling out when the band ended than I did with them. I was still friends with both of them and was there when the two of them kind of like got together to work on a project with someone else, Bruce McCullough from the Kids in the Hall. And I just happened to arrive to hang out with Brian at his apartment when they were wrapping up recording these songs just in Brian's apartment. And the two of them were like, oh, what do you think? Do you want to play music again? Do you feel like you want to get together? And, this really kind of tentative, exes talking about dating again. And they're like, yeah, sure, that'd be good. Well, do you want to get it? Should we ask someone to come and play drums? Who do you want to get? And I just said, I'll do it. I'd love to. And amazingly, they went for it. They were open to it, which is, part of, why I love those guys so much. They were so open-minded and just like, yeah, I'll try that. Sure, I'll try that. And, they had no reason to stick with someone who could not play drums because they were both amazing players. Brian is still, recognized as being one of the best guitar players in Canada. People say it to me all the time, and he's just incredible. So, that they would do this with me was, very, I feel very grateful for that because, playing with them kind of, well, all of us together we made something that put us all on, a path that became our living and kind of a pretty significant part of our life.
How did that go early on in terms of playing the drums? Did you find that you had a natural innate talent for it, an internal clock that was like, wow, I can do this? Or was it pretty bad at the beginning? You had to work at it.
Honestly, it was like pretty rough. And there's positive things and negative things about it. One of the negative things I think about learning to play drums when you're in a band is that you have to keep like the beat. You have to just keep going. You can't stop. So that part is really good. But I think it kind of like limits your, I don't know, the variety of your expression. For me anyway, that was my own kind of like feeling. We did a box set of all of our albums with another album of like extra tracks on it. So I was listening to all of these tapes of right back to the very first rehearsals that we had together. And I was like, these are amazing. I'm so glad that we did these because they are so like, it's like, this sort of collision of really great players with someone who doesn't know what they're doing. And it makes a very unique sound. We made a really unique sound and again became an instrumental band very like totally by accident. So this thing that was part of our uniqueness came about by accident because we did have a singer and he quit after a couple of rehearsals. So it's like all these things just aligned that made us kind of unique and things that you would think of as being detriments to your ability to move forward were all positive things. That's something that I feel like I constantly learn from. You're never too young or never too old to learn new things. And and that there's value in every approach. You can just do anything. You can do anything.
Yeah. And also you just don't get in the way of just the natural progression of life. Like things just fall into place. You could try to make things happen, but like you say, band members come and go, and things they just land the right way.
Yeah, and I was playing pretty simple things to begin with, and over time, as I got better, things got a little more, sophisticated or complicated or uh, whatever. But it came from, like, I mentioned that in the book, that it was like the Cramps and the Ramones, two bands that had like really basic kind of like very, pretty easy to follow songs, kind of the same as like, the Kinks or a lot of like 60s garage rock, where there were a lot of pretty primitive bands. But the Cramps, they had this one song, Rockin' Bones, that I remember thinking, like, this is so amazing, because it's just kick, snare, boom, boom. And I was like, I can do that. Like, if things start falling apart in a song, I can just go to that and I'm going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, was Crash Kills 5 part of that scene for a while? Did you start to develop a following, playing a lot of clubs around the?
We were together for like 2.5 years. The first year, Brian was in the band, Brian Connolly, and then he quit the band, and another friend of ours, Mohammed Nagdi, joined, and we made one 7-inch single. We recorded a second record that we never got to the point of mixing it. We split up before we got there, and we played around locally. We would go here and there, like, small towns around Toronto. We played a lot with a band from London, the Demics. So we did a lot of shows opening for them, going different places, played our own shows in Montreal and Ottawa, and all around kind of Southern Ontario. We didn't go too far, but a great experience. There were a lot of bands that I think we kind of like felt like we had a little community with, and some of those people are still like the friendships that I have today. It's kind of like this person is connected to that person, and this is the girlfriend of the guy in the band that we played our second show with, and she's a good friend of mine.
The book doesn't romanticize the punk scene. I mean, you mentioned that the homophobia was within parts of the scene. How difficult was it navigating that personally for you?
Honestly, I wouldn't say it was like so difficult, and partly because I was in the closet. So, kind of word got out. Someone saw me going into a gay bar and, told me that they'd seen me. And then, other people knew, and people were talking. And then at some point it was like, kind of like so many things were at that time. It was like common knowledge, but people didn't talk about it. I think kind of until I acknowledged it myself, other people didn't really talk about it too much. So, coming out was sort of a gradual process. And, at first I wasn't really so comfortable with the people, even that I was in a band with, like telling them, there was like, definitely fear about it. And I don't even know like exactly what the fear is, like, fear of rejection, or fear of kind of losing your place in the social structure, which is, relatively meaningless at that time. But, when you're really young, those things are more important.
Sure.
So, there were definitely a lot of things from everywhere, from movies, from songs, from bands I was going to see, from just, all the messages you get from people in high school, just like living kind of in a world that is, mostly straight. You get all the messages all the time that they are not for what you are. So you until you kind of have the inner strength to kind of face that yourself, and kind of deal with it, then those things just have a power over you.
Yeah, I remember when Rob Halford came on. I don't remember when that was, but it was great that there was it was that the fans just didn't seem to care. I mean, it was,
No,
you
I
know,
kind
and
of
that
feel like that made him so much more, like he was kind of like this sort of superhuman, character, like lots of singers and in bands or people in bands were. But after a certain point, I think kind of like, as media and kind of our understanding about bands, all of that, the mythology about it has been mostly sort of taken apart. Like we understand now that a lot of that stuff is sort of a put on, like it's theatrics. And so you see someone like Rob Halford, who is a fully formed person now, and he's a lovable, funny, sweet guy, so it's like him coming out just made him so much more interesting because,
sure.
coinciding with the times of, being gay or being, in a band and being gay, that those things they're meaningless to most people. The people who they have meaning for, it's on both ends of the spectrum. It's either really positively or really negatively. And the people who it's really negative for, it's like, who cares? That's
At least now
they're
you
not.
know, just weed them out.
Yeah. They're not people that I want to
Right.
be like, hanging out with. We've all had enough of those at our, family picnics and whatnot.
We're talking with Don Pyle, musician, record producer, photographer, writer, a man of many hats. We didn't really talk about your photography all that much. I know that's a big part of your life too. His new memoir, Rough Description, Love Letters and Ghost Stories from a Life in Music. It's due out May 26th. I'm going to talk about Shadowy Men on a Shadowy Planet. They formed in 1984. Brian Connolly on guitar, keyboards, Reed Diamond on bass, yourself on drums, right?
Yep.
And it became a defining part of your life. Talk about how the band came together out of your earlier bands and experiences.
Like I was mentioning about meeting by accident, where Reed had this duo with Bruce McCullough from Kids in the Hall called Orion's Belt that was like guitar, bass, and a drum machine. And it was kind of like funny songs, sort of like what Bruce does on his live shows and on his own records. And he's still kind of doing a similar kind of thing. So when we first got together, it was like, there was no agenda, but Ken, who was our singer, he had a couple of songs. He'd been in a band with Reed, and we just started playing our own songs. We just like made stuff up. And so we would just play sometimes on one riff for an hour, and then eventually started recording little bits of things, and then realizing like, okay, this bit goes with that bit, and putting songs together. So I think that we felt like really kind of empowered really early on because we didn't need a PA. We didn't care about a record deal. We didn't care about a manager. It was just like such low stakes that we just pursued what we wanted to do, which was lots of times like making stuff, like building sets for shows, like ridiculous, elaborate sets, which were all kind of like to distract from our self-consciousness about being a band on stage. So anyway, the first time that we played, we had such a great response. And we were really lucky because I kind of feel like after our very first show, we could just do whatever we wanted. We could play wherever we wanted. And, mind you, our aim was like, not so high. It's like, we're going to play at this club that holds 200 people and sell it out. That was incredible to us. Like, we can sell out our favorite club and we can make records and give them away because there's enough people coming to our shows to give away singles that we've, made. So we just started doing things, making records, constantly writing songs, putting out 7-inch singles because they were still super cheap to do. Postage was still affordable. All those things that have made records, an elite object now. Those things weren't barriers at that time. So we did a ton of singles, and then just we there was something about being an instrumental band too that really created a lot of opportunities for us and doing soundtrack stuff. So we started having a lot of people asking us to do music for their films, friends doing, stuff for their short films, and then more of that. And then eventually with the Kids in the Hall, because Reed was their theater tech. He was doing their live sound, kind of producing their live shows. And we were friends with them, and started doing shows live with them where we were on stage together in basically the exact same format as the TV series, where they would film a bit and then the lights would come up and we'd play, and then our lights would go down, and then it would be back to them. So as scenes were changed, that kind of stuff. And they had a song on our first 7/8 single that they were using as their theme to open their live shows off of our little record, and they pushed for that to be the theme for the show. They pushed for us to be the band that was doing music for the show, because we had this great easy relationship and kind of, I think, very sympathetic sensibilities. And so when we started doing the series, obviously that created, a bigger opportunity for us. We were really kind of like on the verge of making a living in the band already before we started doing the kids. And that was just simply by just going for it, like so many bands in Canada. It was a real common thing for bands to, like our goal is to go to Montreal or, to go to Vancouver. And we're like, Vancouver is so far away. Why don't we go to New York City? That's closer. Or, Detroit. And so we started going into the States a lot. And it was somehow something that a lot of Canadian bands were afraid of. But we were playing in the US, all over North America.
Why do you think that was? Why were they afraid to go to the US?
I don't even think that people are conscious about it being fear. I think it's just because it's easy. It's like, okay, this magazine that's coming out about Canadian rock is writing about, what's happening in Halifax, what's happening in Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver. So those are the places that we are sort of trained to be, that this is that pathway from left coast to right coast. That is the path that we will follow for a long time. I think that there's a bit of, like, at the time, I think there was certainly a bit more of like Canadian insecurity. If you went to the States, a lot of bands, like, nobody was interested. And
so you're starting from the bottom again if you go to the States.
But we didn't, our bottom, like, what we measured as success was so close to the bottom that was like that it was like
not far of a fall.
This is great, like, right. And we were very, very lucky to have people who had some kind of influence who really liked us and were fans of us. And so people like Calvin Johnson from K Records, Beat Happening, like, he put on the first shows that we did in the States in Olympia, Washington. And kind of like because of Calvin's endorsement, it was like the West Coast became like a real, like a place where we did really well. And, we had a lot of people from pretty well-known bands coming to see us. And we had a lot of great sort of like word of mouth support. We certainly played closer to home, Buffalo, a lot. We became friends with bands down there. So it was, I don't know, it just seemed easy to us to go to the States.
At what point did you realize it was going to be mostly instrumental? Was that a conscious decision? Did it just happen naturally that way? Was it because of music you're going to make for soundtracks that you decided to go instrumental? How did that all play out?
It happened by accident after our fourth rehearsal when Ken Priestley, who had been singing and playing guitar in the first few rehearsals, decided that it was too far to come to rehearsal because we were rehearsing in the basement of Brian's work, kind of like secretly on the weekends and evenings when no one knew that there was a band in the office. But Ken lived, pretty far out on the edge of the city, so he just didn't feel like it was worth it. So we just said, well, let's just carry on. We all were into a lot of instrumental stuff. We were big fans of Link Ray, knew a lot of kind of like the original kind of like surf sort of stuff. And we're, really into a lot of soundtrack stuff, Nino Rota, Ennio Morricone, some of the classic soundtrack things. And I think that we thought of ourselves as like, or the music that we were making as being kind of like almost like soundtrack music. And like even our band name, when we had to pick a band name, like we didn't think we were going to play live because we were so beginner-ish. But when a friend offered us free rehearsal time in their rehearsal space in exchange for opening for their band, we're like, okay, well, let's do it. And the band name that we picked, we thought, okay, this name is too long and too stupid to be a name that you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life. So, it was kind of a name that kind of suited a band that was only going to play a couple of times.
Where did the name come from? What's the origins of it?
It's not a very interesting story, but it was just like, okay, we have to come up with a name. And so we all made lists and we all had shadowy something on them. And Brian had made this cassette, this mix cassette for Reed that was entitled The Shadow of a Shadowy Man. And so from our various lists, we put all these pieces together and made this name that sounded like it was a movie title.
Yeah.
Like, so it was like, we liked that it sounded like a movie title rather than a band name.
Yeah. Almost like a sci-fi / film noir name. It's an unforgettable name. It really is. I'm curious if you know the name James Calvin Wilsey, because
of course, yeah. I played it with Chris Isaac.
Chris Isaac
was in the Avengers.
Yes. And, I thought of him when I was listening to your music because he had that style too. And it's just a fantastic sound that he had and a sad ending to his life. But there's a great book that was written on him that you should check out if you get a chance. But
yeah, I didn't know there was a book about him. No, I was a big fan of the Avengers.
Yep.
And got into Chris Isaac pretty early as well. Partly because of my friend Louis doing his sound, being his sound person. Where I was hearing Chris Isaac when he was in the band Silvertone before it was his band, and there's kind of like all these connections that cross over with punk rock because John Silver, who had been the drummer in the band The Dills, a band that I was a big fan of and got connected with when I was young. It was kind of like his band, Silvertone, and Chris Isaac was like the singer guitar player in it, and then he got ousted from the band, and then it became Chris Isaac and Silvertone, and then just Chris Isaac.
The book, by the way, is Michael Goldberg. I had him on to talk about. That's the author, and the book is called Wicked Game: The True Story of Guitarist James Calvin Wilsey. I can't recommend it enough. It's one of
no, I really want to read that.
Your band, best known for that track, Having an Average Weekend. There's an alternate version. That's the one that's used for the show Kids in the Hall, right?
Yep.
When you wrote that song, did you have any idea that it'd become so iconic?
Never. Like, it was the third song on a 3-song 7-inch. So, honestly, like all the songs, our first several singles, I really like all of the songs that are on those. And we chose those songs out of the songs that we had written at that point, like for each of the singles, because they sounded like singles. And there's something about writing for a single that is very different than just writing kind of like more sort of free-formed or abstractly or, exploratory. It's like, we were raised on singles. So it's like very concise. You get in, you get out, you go to many parts, and then the song is over. I remember when we recorded that one, I thought it was like so sophisticated because it had 12-string acoustic on it. And it just like it gave us such a different sound because obviously like, we're playing live, it's just like one electric guitar player. So with two 12-string guitars, playing the same part in stereo, it just gave that song like such a vibrance and a kind of I don't know, kind of like an emotional warmth to it that was sort of unexpected until it was recorded. Um, so I don't know, the first song on that was the song on that single was the one that we thought was like the catchiest song. This is a song called Our Weapons Are Useless, and that's a song that, you know, people like it, but I can't say it's ever been like one of the songs where people are like, yeah, that song is the best song you ever wrote. But, it's a great thing about being in a band when you write 150 songs. There's different songs kind of rise and fall to the surface, and, some old songs that you've dropped for 8 years suddenly become your favorite song.
Thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. Let's talk about Dallas Good now, your relationship with him. It's a recurring thread throughout the book. He's best known as the co-founder, guitarist, and vocalist of the band The Sadies, right?
Yeah.
You and Dallas had a long-standing creative and personal relationship, and you write in the book, quote, "I can barely remember a time when I didn't know Dallas Good." And there's the title. It's not just good, it's Dallas Good. That's that's the chapter's title. That's powerful. What made him such a unique musician compared to the others that you've worked with?
Dallas, first of all, is super encyclopedic. Is that the words? Encyclopedic? Anyway,
That's it.
Even though he was like, quite a bit younger than me and us, I'm trying to think how much age difference there was, like 16 years or something. I forget. But when I first met him, I didn't, there was no kind of like age gap in my mind because he knew all the same kind of foundational things, early R&B, the Kinks, the psychedelic stuff, 13/4 Elevators, the Ramones, punk rock, hardcore. He had like all the bases covered. Country music. His dad and his uncles are still in a band called the Good Brothers, who are kind of like a Canadian institution, country band that that was what he grew up in. Like his parents being friends with the Grateful Dead, and his uncle dating Janis Joplin. So there was like a real kind of like musical legacy, but he also went to university. He was to study musicology. He was really into the history of music, and one of those people who is also just like really consumed by playing the guitar. Like Dallas, it seemed like from a really young age was very distinctly on a path towards becoming a musician, not like, a musician who works in a music shop, which is kind of like, kind of how I got to know him more, because he was working in this used shop. Him and Sean from the Sadies, they were coming to see Shadowy Men at the time as well. So, we were crossing paths with them. But he was just really easy to connect with on the sort of similar level. And we first worked together on an album with Jad Fair from the group Half Japanese. There was a documentary made about Jad and his band Half Japanese, and which resulted in us writing an album with Jad Fair, Shadowy Men writing an album And then Brian, the guitar player, didn't want to record the album. So we asked Dallas to play on it. And that was sort of the beginning of our working relationship. And that happened like pretty much at the same time as he was starting the Sadies. So, at that time, Dallas was in like at least 7 bands.
Wow.
He was in so many bands. And the Sadies weren't like, kind of the center of everything yet. So, we played in this band, Phonocomb. That started because of the Jad Fair thing. We toured with Jad, toured on our own as a 3-piece with no bass. And then eventually decided to get a bass player, and then, did our own album with the bass player. And so just over the years, because of what our connecting interests are, our proximity to each other, because we live pretty close to each other, we were always kind of like crossing paths and working together. We were both learning how to do recording engineering. So, we would work on each other's recordings. I mixed a lot of the Sadie stuff. I recorded a lot of the early stuff. Similarly, Dallas played on so many things that I did, film score things or just like little projects where I'm just writing something. Would play it for him, and he would be like, I'm in your band. Like, there's no band, but I'm in your band. So, I'm going to do some guitar on this. So it was like working relationship, friendship, and then just over the years, with the people that you're closest to, it was really like some of like the kind of like more difficult personal things that each of us were going through that brought us closer together, because that was where, kind of like our emotional friendship sort of developed. Because, you have the music thing, and it's so easy to spend tons of time with people who you're in bands with, and kind of, not have a deep emotional relationship with. But that happened with Dallas and I, and it was, one of those friendships that was just like always growing. And then, when Phonocomb ended, it was totally natural that like, okay, now the Sadies, I'm not like part-time in 7 bands anymore. I am in this band. And then when he like focused on the Sadies, it was like they just like blew up, and that was amazing to see someone who was your friend, from when they were 16 years old, just with every album writing music that was more and more sophisticated, more and more emotional, just like the deeper connections that they formed across the country, across the whole continent. Like, it was so great because, when they started, they were doing a lot of, kind of music that was perhaps with a similar relationship to things from the past that Shadowy Men had a relationship with, like country, surf, punk rock. So, I kind of felt like we were a similar family. We were a family sort of together. We were, Shadowy Men and Sadies were part of the same family. And that sort of extended to like, the Good Brothers, their friends, and then other bands that we played with. But, as Dallas traveled and toured more, all the people that Shadowy Men were friends with, sometimes through our introductions, sometimes just naturally that they were drawn to each other, they all became Dallas's friends, but kind of like beyond that. So like, people that, like Buffy St. Marie and Gordon Lightfoot and Randy Bachman, all these people, were just like in awe of them because they were, they still are, but as a 4-piece band, when they were going, they were super powerful and inspiring. The crossover with Nico Case also, that was a big kind of like Shadowy Men, Sadies sort of like passing the baton, because Brian from Shadowy Men was on Nico's first couple of albums. He worked with her and toured, and then when she was like looking for someone else to, a band to do stuff with, Brian recommended the Sadies. Dallas toured with Nico with, not the Sadies with, as a guitar player in her band with other musicians. So, we had just a lot of similar family.
Yeah, and he was so young when he passed. He was only in his late 40s.
Yeah, yeah, unbelievable. Like, it's just like, there's some people where it feels sort of more tragic or just more awful because, they're just like rising. Dallas is like going towards the thing that will ultimately, he has the respect and everything, but there's still a really hard working band. They're having to work all the time to make a living. He didn't have a comfortable living yet as, someone with sort of like that, one or two songs that are your great success, to make you comfortable.
It came by such surprise. I mean, it was just, he had, I think he went in for a procedure for coronary issues, and
yeah, it happened being tested for this heart condition that he had, that he didn't know of, an undiagnosed heart condition. I don't know if you've seen or heard, he did an album that just came out for Record Store Day, an album with Richard Reed Parry. Richard does tons of like soundtrack stuff. He's in the Arcade Fire. But the two of them met at a music festival more than 10 years ago and started working on an album together 10 years ago. And it has just come out.
wow.
And it's like, just adds to the heartbreak because it's so good. It's and such a beautiful album. And, it was pretty rare that Dallas would step aside from the Sadies to do something. So it really was, another dimension of what he was capable of. And, it's so sad that we, not only is he not here, but that there's not more of that. In some ways, I kind of feel like it's awful, but I think like, God, Dallas did everything. Like he got to work with like so many people that he idolized. He had, people that he grew up idolizing that were now fans of his. He's done so many records. He's he's done so many things, but I kind of felt like there's more because he's the Richard album. I kind of feel is like, okay, this is like the beginning of a new phase. This is Dallas as like producer. He produced a few records recently. Band called TV Freaks, an album that I worked on with him. Another band called the Garys that he did during the pandemic lockdown. So, he was really all these skills and talents that he'd accumulated, built, they were all kind of coming out. And, he could play everything. He went on tour with Justin Townes Earle, the Sadies, Townes Earle. They backed him up, and Dallas is playing keyboards on it. Like, he grew up playing piano, but it wasn't something that was his forte. But at the same time, he was one of those incredibly musical people where, like, I remember sitting with him at the piano. I don't know if you know the Alice Cooper record.
Back to the 70s, we're talking.
Yeah, like one of the, the Love It to Death or Killer.
Right.
Where it has this like long piano thing that joins two songs together. And he sat down at the piano and, I just watched his long spidery fingers just kind of like intuitively know where to go to play that, and watched him in just a few minutes figure out this whole long passage that, for me was like drilled into my brain from 12 years old. And to see, someone like decode the mystery in front of me was like magic,
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases, And before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. Another great talent that we lost too soon is Steve Albini, and you have a chapter devoted to him as well. He was the engineer on the 1993 album Sport Fishing, the Lure of the Bait, the Luck of the Hook. He seemed to capture, and he's known mostly for that album he produced for Nirvana, In Utero. He's known for being able to capture that sound of the drums, like you feel like you're in the room. And you write, quote, Steve's not so secret ingredient was his superb skill. Talk about his approach. What made him so unique and able to capture that sound on the drums?
Steve was that sort of magical mix of scientist and artist, where he really studied the properties of microphones, sound, technique, sound dynamics, the science of sound, reflection, all of the, preamplification. Like, he knew electronics really well. He could take equipment apart, repair it. Like I mentioned in the book, this one recording that when Phonocomb recorded our album with him, the studio that we went into, all of this equipment, which was part of the reason for choosing this studio, was broken. And so we got there and Steve's like, oh, fuck. And then he spends the whole first day repairing everything in the studio. And so the guy who owned the studio afterwards said, like, my studio never worked this well, ever. As a sort of technician, musician, he was super skilled, but he also had an extreme and I don't know what you'd call it, but I guess extreme sense of humor. And, kind of like what I said about punk rock, like he came from punk rock thing as well. So he could see the humor in certain aspects of like violence or really aggressive music or music that made no sense, that was kind of like exploratory or kind of like, the foundation of it is noise rather than melody, or scientific things that made you, or language play that made you play guitar, that made him play guitar, like language phrasing. So, not conventional guitar playing, where it was kind of like, making machine sounds or making animal sounds or sounds that had phrasing like conversation. That was something I saw him do that I thought was really cool. It was like playing guitar with like syllables, so not in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, not that. It was like, kind of like that. So, he had all of these kind of odd traits and was an aesthete to the max. Like, like love beautiful microphones, would rather use like, okay, this microphone is essentially the same as this one, but this one sure is beautiful. So he would buy like esoteric microphones from Russia or Poland, because there were such beautiful things. And like his band, Shellac, their logo to begin with was the logo for this microphone company, Lomo. And he was such an intelligent guy too. He could be super caustic, and he's very smart, very analytic, and would sometimes kind of be, hurtful in his extremeness. But he was someone who, over time, that I saw become a much more sensitive and better person, largely because of finding someone who was just completely accepting of him and being loved and having kind of like love, like love reflected to and from the person who became his wife, Heather Winna. So, you know, I saw him just become a much more thoughtful and caring person. So he was, you know, a really wonderful guy. I know there's a lot of, um, you know, people like after he died that were like, have no time for him or no patience because of, you know, some things that he'd done or said in the past. But even though I knew some of those things that people had mentioned, I could sort of see through it because, you know, I understood that sort of like black sense of humor to say like the most offensive thing, knowing that this is going to piss off a person that you want to piss off, you know?
Yeah.
So not because he like, you know, necessarily felt some of those things or, you know, believed, I think even some of the things he was doing. He was total no bullshit about sort of the commercial aspects of music. And I think that that was a place that, that really helped Shadowy Men catch his eye because I think, you know, I know he saw the way we were doing things and it was kind of like, you know, very much outside of like the music business and you know, with a sense of humor, but not being goofy, that we took our playing seriously, but also, you know, acknowledge things like, you know, our foundation of classical music comes from Bugs Bunny. You know, it's the same with him. So we had, you know, some sort of similar things, but he was definitely a little more caustic than we were. And sometimes maybe not as sensitive as we might have been, but he was also a very sweet and sensitive guy, you know?
Yeah. And the famous story, but he got a flat fee for producing In Utero. He refused the percentage and he marched to the beat of his own drum.
Yeah. And, you know, honestly, it's been really cool over the years to see with him because, you know, he gets asked all the time about the Pixies, Nirvana, tell these stories, you know, over and over again and tell them. And it's been interesting to see his perception, or it was interesting to see his perception of those experiences change over time. Because I think he was kind of like more sort of hardline, anti-corporate, and, you know, this band who's kind of like blowing up and doing their record. And so like we worked with him right after he did. One of the times that we worked with him was right after he did In Utero. So we were hearing, you know, all kinds of Nirvana stories and recording of that. And
yeah, because they finished, I think, what they recorded in February of '93, and you were with him. Was it shortly after that?
well, we recorded with him. I recorded with him 5 or 6 times. So there was like, you know, not just the album, you know, the Phonochrome album. We did a couple singles with him. You know, another band that I was in recorded with him.
The Sport Fishing one was recorded though in what late would that have been early '93, somewhere around there?
Sounds about right.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so seeing how his kind of like take on those experiences changed over time was not so hard line. You know, it was more of a kind of human sensitive understanding about what was going on with them through that experience, as well as the experience that he had with them. And kind of like, you know, that they were, you know, on the same team, you know?
I love that album. And I
Oh my
got
God,
to
it's
say,
so good.
I think it's a bonus track on there. Yeah, it's a bonus track. It's called 16 Encores.
Yeah, that we did.
Okay. Is there a story behind that? Because I made a list of all the songs that I noticed that you cover in there.
Well, the one that is on the recording is probably only half as long as how it eventually got. And then when we started playing again with Dallas, it got even bigger. And
There's Deuce from Kiss in there and Tie
was-
Your Mother Down from Queen.
I think that was like a sort of a mix of like those K-Tel ads where, where you hear like just the riff of,
Right.
the song. And so it's like this complex thing boiled down to its like most minimal signature,
I found 23. I think it might be 24. I don't know, but
so we
Green Acres theme songs. Oh my God, that's great.
Yeah, honestly, I think of that song as like being like soup. Like just like one of those community soups that you just keep adding an ingredient to.
The dueling banjos starts
and
off.
Yeah, sometimes it tastes really good, sometimes it's garbage.
Well, I'd love to know, where did Groove Is in the Heart come from? That was just out of nowhere. It's like Smoke on the Water and all the young
Groove Is in the Heart.
dudes.
I mean, that bass riff is so great.
It's great,
And
yeah.
when we put that in, so we had been doing the song for a while before we put that in, and really surprisingly, Reed, the bass player, didn't know that song. I was like, how could you have missed that song?
Yeah.
But we're like, we've got to do it. And we put it in, you kind of look like, okay, where can this piece fit into the song?
Oh, it's so great.
I remember, so then when we first introduced Groove Is in the Heart, when we played that part, I mean, the song was so ridiculous because it was just like, people just hot wired to react. So the whole song was just people going, wow,
Yeah.
wow, with every new riff. But Groove Is in the Heart, I gotta say, that one like really put people over the top. People freaked out for that one.
Sure.
And then when we put our own riff in, we thought, like, how stupid and arrogant would it be to put our own riff into this medley of the greatest riffs ever written?
I love it. I love it.
was
But yeah, that
just-
whole album is fantastic. The Booked on Rock podcast is part of the Boneless Podcasting Network. If you're a fan of classic rock and classic film like I am, go to boneless.lovable.app to find over 20 great shows there. That's boneless.lovable.app, or just go to bookedonrock.com, the Boneless Podcasting Network. It is what you want it to be. Listen with confidence. So the book is out on May 26th. People can pre-order right now. Okay.
Yeah, from ECW or your local bookstore. It's available all over the world. Just ask your local bookshop or order it online or from ecwpress.com or ecw.com.
Yep. Rough description, love letters, and ghost stories from a life in music. Yeah, this was fun, man. Thanks so much for coming on the show, talking about the book, your amazing career. Yeah, Don Pyle, this was awesome.
Great to talk with you. Thanks.
That's it. It's in the books.